Two moments changed everything for Imani Caldwell. The first, standing humiliated on a jet bridge, accused of having an odor and an attitude, forced off a plane from a first-class seat that was rightfully hers. The second, pressing send on a message that would cost billions and reshape an entire industry. Greer, pull the trigger. 3 words. That's all it took to set in motion one of the most stunning corporate takeovers in aviation history. But this isn't just about business. This is about something far more valuable than money. Have you ever been made to feel invisible? Like your dignity was optional? Like the rules that protect others somehow don't apply to you? For Imani Caldwell, a black CEO who'd built her career on turning obstacles into opportunities, that Thanksgiving week flight from Phoenix to New York became the final straw in a lifetime of receipts, her personal archive of the little ways the world tried to diminish her. But what the white woman sitting in Imani's seat 2A didn't know, what the flight attendant with a tight bun and tighter smile couldn't have guessed, was that they weren't dealing with just any passenger. When Imani typed those 3 words to her banker, she wasn't just responding to one incident. She was answering a lifetime of them. The twist? The woman who stole her seat wasn't just any entitled passenger. She was Paige Whitlock, senior counsel for Aster Air, the very airline Imani was about to buy. Welcome to a story about power. Not the kind that comes from a title or a seat assignment, but the kind that rises from knowing exactly who you are in a world determined to tell you otherwise. They removed her from the plane for having an attitude and an odor. Seconds later, she made a decision that would cost billions. How many times have you been judged unfairly based on how you look? How many times have the rules suddenly changed when applied to you? This isn't just about racism in the skies. It's about what happens when power meets prejudice, and prejudice loses. But how exactly does a single passenger go from being humiliated on a jet bridge to owning an entire airline in just 10 days? Stay with me. Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, Thanksgiving week. The terminal packed with families, suitcases, and holiday stress. Imani Caldwell moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency. First class, seat 2A. A simple transaction. Ticket purchased, boarding pass issued, seat assigned. She'd done everything right. Followed every rule. Arrived early. Waited patiently. Yet there she stood in the aisle of the first-class cabin, looking at a white woman sitting comfortably in her assigned seat. When Imani politely pointed out the error, showing her boarding pass with 2A clearly printed, the woman barely glanced up from her phone. No, this is mine. I was assigned here. A quick flash of a boarding pass, just long enough for Imani to catch 2C, before it disappeared back into a designer handbag. When the flight attendant arrived, her name tag reading D. Birch, Imani expected a simple resolution. What she got instead was the beginning of a nightmare. "Ma'am, I need you to step off the plane so we can talk." Those words, spoken with a smile that carried no warmth, were the first domino in a chain that would ultimately cost Aster Air its independence. "There have been complaints," Birch said on the jet bridge, her voice lowered but the impact of her words at maximum volume. "About what?" Imani asked. The answer came like a slap. "Odor. And your attitude." In that moment, standing on the jet bridge while other passengers streamed past, avoiding eye contact, Imani made a calculation. She didn't need this flight. She needed her dignity more. What no one on that plane knew was that Imani Caldwell wasn't just any passenger. She was the founder and CEO of Carver Ascendant Partners, a black-owned investment firm that had been watching Aster Air for months, studying its vulnerabilities, its cultural failures, its pattern of removing black passengers on pretextual complaints. If you've ever been in a situation where you were treated unfairly because of who you are, drop a comment below. Where were you when it happened? I want to hear your story. As Imani walked away from the gate, she pulled out her phone. The camera lens reflected her face. Composed, beautiful in the way battle steel is beautiful, functional, built to hold. With steady thumbs, she typed a message to Greer Ellington, her banker and friend. "Greer, pull the trigger." She attached a photo of the gate, the frame catching Aster Air, in the corner of the placard. The response came instantly. "You're sure? That's billions with AB." Imani's reply, "I've never been more sure." This isn't a revenge story. It's a consequence story. It's about what happens when someone with the power to change a broken system decides that enough is enough. And it all began with a stolen seat and a false accusation. What happens next will show you exactly why dignity is the most valuable currency we possess, and how one woman transformed humiliation into revolution. Before we dive deeper into what happened that day in Phoenix, you need to understand who Imani Caldwell is, and why this moment became her breaking point. Imani wasn't born into privilege. The daughter of a public school teacher in Prospect Heights, Brooklyn, she grew up watching her mother stretch every dollar while instilling in her daughter an unshakable sense of self-worth. "They can take your seat," her mother would say, "but they can't take your mind unless you give it to them." Those words became a foundation. By 35, Imani had built Carver Ascendant Partners from a small investment firm into a powerhouse that stretched from Uniondale to Uptown, from Houston to Oakland, Black capital, brown capital, allied capital working together to create opportunity where others saw only risk. But success didn't shield her from reality. If anything, it highlighted the contrast between what she had earned and how she was still treated. There was Atlanta a year earlier. 2 officers with badges and polite smiles, stopping her on a jet bridge. "Where are you going?" "Why the cash?" They'd called their questions consensual, as if she had any real choice but to answer. She'd had no cash, just a Hermes carry-on and a calendar packed with board meetings. There was Chicago, where a gate agent had asked to see her boarding pass 3 times before believing she belonged in the priority line. There was Dallas, where a lounge attendant had suggested she might be more comfortable in the main terminal. Each incident became part of what Imani called her receipts, a living archive stored in folders on her phone, PDFs of contracts and cap tables, photos of boarding passes, screenshots of emails. Evidence that she belonged in spaces others thought she didn't. For a black woman in America, success doesn't erase discrimination. Sometimes it magnifies it. Have you ever felt that no matter what you achieve, certain people will always see you through the lens of their prejudice first? The real question isn't why Imani kept these receipts, it's why she needed to in the first place. What does it take for someone to move from documenting injustice to dismantling the systems that create it? Keep watching. Imani's company, Carver Ascendant Partners, wasn't just another investment firm. Named after George Washington Carver, it embodied his philosophy of innovation and self-determination. The firm had acquired trucking fleets and mid-market logistics firms. They purchased a short-line railroad that reconnected warehousing jobs to neighborhoods that had been redlined half a century ago. Each acquisition served 2 purposes: generating profit and creating opportunity. This dual mission made Carver Ascendant different. It made them dangerous to the status quo. And Astor Air had been on their radar for months. Astor was the low-cost carrier that had grown bloated, then bold and now brittle, after a failed merger with BlueJet. A federal judge had blocked the deal, citing how consolidation was crowding out competition, leaving the Big Four to control over 80% of domestic seats. The airline had staggered through bankruptcy, emerged, then stumbled again on the same cultural failures. A DI council disbanded in the name of focus, a string of lawsuits from black passengers removed from flights on questionable complaints, internal memos about jet bridge interdictions in Atlanta that echoed the language of stop and frisk. Imani had been watching Astor Air the way a falcon watches a field, patient, precise, waiting for the right moment. If you're still with me, type dignity in the comments. I want to know who's following this journey. The Thanksgiving trip to New York wasn't just any journey for Imani. It was a tradition, taking her mother to the Macy's parade along 6th Avenue, just as they'd done when Imani was a child standing on a milk crate to see the giant Snoopy float. These moments with her mother grounded her. They reminded her of who she was beyond the boardrooms and balance sheets. They connected her to a simpler time when her biggest worry was whether she could see over the crowd. That morning in Phoenix, as she checked her watch and her boarding pass again, first class, Imani had no idea that this routine flight would become the catalyst for something historic. She just wanted to get home to her mother. To stand beside her on 6th Avenue. To point up at the floats and feel for a moment like that little girl on the milk crate again. The jet bridge has always been a space of vulnerability for black travelers. Not quite the terminal, not quite the plane, a liminal space where rules become flexible and witnesses become scarce. Imani knew this. She'd researched the TSA's behavior detection program that treated fidgeting and yawning like probable cause. She'd studied Astor's internal security team's partnership with airport police at Hartsfield-Jackson to observe indicators during jet bridge stops. The data showed black passengers made up more than half of those stops. Seizures of cash without charges had followed. Imani had written in her notes, "Racial capitalism codified." She knew the statistics. She understood the patterns. She recognized the playbook. What she couldn't have known was that she was about to experience it firsthand, and that her response would rewrite the rules of the game entirely. As she boarded the plane that morning, Imani carried more than just her Hermes bag. She carried the weight of every receipt she'd ever collected. She carried her mother's wisdom. She carried the responsibility of her success. And when she found seat 2A occupied, when she was asked to step off the plane, when she heard the word odor spoken as if it were evidence, something crystallized within her. This wasn't just about a seat. It wasn't even about this particular flight. It was about a system designed to make her doubt herself, to make her question whether she belonged, to make her smaller than she was. A system she now had the power to change. As Imani stood on that jet bridge, watching the supervisor approach with words like safety and company policy, her phone buzzed with a message from Greer. Langston's on. He wants to know if we deploy the debt tender tonight or stage it. The plan had been set for Christmas week, when Astor's bonds would be especially vulnerable and their board especially tired. They would buy enough paper at 5 cents on the dollar to put Carver at the front of the line if Astor stumbled again. But sometimes, the universe hands you a moment of perfect clarity. Tonight, Imani replied. Seconds matter. And with that decision the countdown began. Let's rewind to that moment on the plane, the exact instant when everything changed. Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport during Thanksgiving week is a symphony of chaos. Families with rolling suitcases and cranberry sauce packed in Tupperware. Overhead monitors flashing delays. A toddler in reindeer pajamas tugging at a snowman balloon. Amid this holiday commotion, Imani Caldwell moved with purpose. Flight 1482 to New York. First class, seat 2A. A simple transaction that should have been honored without question. At the aircraft door, a flight attendant with a bun as tight as her tone glanced at Imani's boarding pass. Morning. Straight ahead, she said flatly. Then, turning to greet the white couple behind Imani, her voice lifted with sudden warmth. Welcome aboard. That contrast, that subtle shift in tone, wasn't lost on Imani. It was another receipt for her collection. Another data point in a pattern too consistent to be coincidence. As she crossed the threshold into first class, weaving around a kneeling mechanic, she found seat 2A occupied. The woman sitting there, mid-30s with a cinnamon bob and a camel coat that managed to be both camel and condescending, didn't even look up from her phone when Imani stopped beside the row. Excuse me, Imani said, her voice measured and professional. I believe you're in my seat. 2A. The response came without eye contact. No, this is mine. I was assigned here. A boarding pass appeared and disappeared in a flash, just long enough for Imani to catch 2C, before it vanished back into a designer handbag. Mine says 2A. Imani kept her voice steady, showing her own pass longer, transparency as armor. This is where flight attendant D. Birch entered the scene, appearing as if conjured by discomfort. What's the issue? She asked, looking between the two women. We're both assigned to 2A, said the woman in the seat, a lie delivered with confidence. Imani met the attendant's eyes directly. My pass is for 2A. Birch's smile carried the weight of someone who'd been taught that smiles could undo facts. She took both passes and left, promising to sort it out, while the plane continued to fill with passengers. Imani stood in the aisle, visible and vulnerable as minutes passed. What happened next reveals exactly how quickly customer service can become a weapon. Have you ever been made to feel like you were the problem for simply asking for what you paid for? For what was rightfully yours? The real issue wasn't about a seat assignment. It was about who gets the benefit of the doubt, and who doesn't. But why would an airline risk everything by treating a passenger this way? The answer will shock you. When Birch returned, her smile had been replaced by process. Ma'am, she said to Imani, I need you to step off the plane so we can talk. The word ma'am landed like a soft hammer. We can talk here, Imani replied, her voice careful measured. Birch glanced past Imani, caught the captain's eye at the galley door, then turned back. There have been complaints. About what? Imani asked. The question cut clean through pretense. Odor, Birch said, blinking once hard. And your attitude. She seemed to taste the word, searching for one less likely to ignite tinder. Heat crawled up Imani's neck. She knew the script. It had been written and rewritten on planes from Phoenix to Philadelphia. The allegation vague enough to be irrefutable, the humiliation precise enough to be effective. A man in seat 2D shifted uncomfortably, staring. The woman in 2A put in an AirPod, creating a soundtrack to Imani's public shaming. I haven't even sat down, Imani said. I don't have an odor. Birch's smile returned, brittle as thin ice. Ma'am, if you can't comply, we can go back to the gate. This is the moment where many would back down. Would you? Drop a comment with stand, if you would stand your ground, or walk, if you would walk away. Imani had built entire companies on the difference between wants and needs. She didn't need this flight, she needed her dignity more. She stepped back into the aisle, the wheels of her carry-on measuring the distance to the door, to the jet bridge, to whatever awaited beyond. On the bridge she pulled out her phone. The camera lens reflected her face, composed, beautiful in the way battle steel is beautiful, functional, built to hold. The gate agent looked over, then away. A uniformed supervisor arrived, Trevor Hanks, according to his badge, with apologies so smooth they squeaked. "We've had a report," he said. "We're sorting it out." "By removing the black woman," Imani said. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. The scene folded into a blur of travelers threading past, eyes sliding off, a mother tugging her child's hand away as if this were contagious. The woman from 2A peered around the door and gave Imani an expression people thought was neutral but never was. This is the moment where many stories of discrimination end, with isolation, with humiliation, with powerlessness. But Imani Caldwell wasn't most people. As she stood on that jet bridge, Imani made a decision that would reshape an entire industry. She opened the encrypted app she used for board decisions and typed, "Greer, pull the trigger." She attached a photo of the gate, the frame catching Astor Air, in the corner of the placard. Greer Ellington, her banker and friend, texted back in under a second, "You're sure? That's billions with AB." Imani's thumbs were steady. "I've never been more sure." The supervisor came back with terms like safety and company policy. If she rebooked, they could upgrade her on another flight. If she filed a complaint, it would be investigated. If she boarded now, it might further inflame the situation. Corporate language designed to make her doubt herself. To make her question whether what had just happened was really discrimination or simply a misunderstanding. But Imani knew. And she had the power to do something about it. She rebooked onto the last red-eye to JFK on a different carrier, texted her mother that the parade plan might shift, and walked the terminal's polished loop until she could breathe through the choke in her chest. Phoenix's glass turned dusk lavender, then indigo. The Phoenix Police Department's K-9 unit paraded a German shepherd past a coffee kiosk. The dog sniffed listlessly at the pastry case. She laughed, brief and unkind. On the flight east, she did not close her eyes. Somewhere over Tulsa, she opened a file labeled Spot, Notes on the TSA's behavior detection program that gave officers an index of human quirks to misunderstand. At 37,000 feet, the words rang flat compared to what she had just experienced firsthand. She landed at JFK to wet cold and a sky that looked uncommitted. Astor's bonds opened down 2%, then 5%. By the time she got to her mother's apartment in Prospect Heights, Greer had secured commitments for 90% of the distressed tranche. Langston had drafted the letters. "You'll need to decide," he said on speaker as Imani helped her mother staple silver garland to a papier-mâché star. "Hostile or friendly?" Her mother hummed along with Ella Fitzgerald on the radio and anchored another loop of garland with a thumb. "You don't need his words," she said, meaning Langston, meaning every man who'd ever tried to walk Imani to an answer like a dog on a leash. "You already decided." In that moment, with her mother's wisdom filling the room, Imani knew exactly what kind of acquisition this would be. Not hostile, purposeful. Not vengeful, transformative. This wouldn't be about punishing one flight attendant or one entitled passenger. It would be about changing the system that made their behavior possible, even predictable. It would be about creating an airline where dignity wasn't a luxury upgrade but the standard service for everyone. What Imani couldn't have known then, as she helped her mother with holiday decorations while setting in motion a billion-dollar acquisition, was that the woman who had taken her seat wasn't just any passenger. She was Paige Whitlock, senior counsel for Astor Air. The very person who would soon receive a letter accusing Carver Ascendant of opportunism and publicity-seeking, while defending an airline that had systematically discriminated against black passengers. The choreographer, not just a random dancer in the grim ballet of bias. That revelation was still coming. And when it arrived, it would change everything, again. By Monday, the rumor had grown legs and sprinted across financial news networks. Black CEO buys airline after discrimination incident. The headlines practically wrote themselves. Astor's press office called first. A journalist at a national morning show called next. Is it true you were removed from a first-class seat for attitude? Is it true you're buying the airline? Imani took a breath long enough to reach back to the girl on the milk crate watching Snoopy. One of those is factual, she said. The other is a rumor. Both are symptoms. But behind her measured response lay a meticulously crafted plan. One that had been months in the making, waiting for the perfect catalyst. Astor Air wasn't just any acquisition target. It represented everything Carver Ascendant stood against. A company that had grown through consolidation rather than innovation, that treated diversity as a marketing exercise rather than a core value, that had systematically failed its black customers and employees. Imani had been watching Aster for months, studying its vulnerabilities. The airline had cash but a cohesion problem. It had planes but a people problem. It had routes but a reputation problem. What it didn't have was a leader who understood that safety and dignity were inseparable, that you couldn't claim to care about one while systematically undermining the other. The plan was elegant in its simplicity: buy enough of Aster's distressed debt to put Carver Ascendant at the front of the creditor line. Use that leverage to force a board vote. Present an alternative vision so compelling that even skeptical shareholders would have to consider it. But timing was everything. The original timeline had targeted Christmas week, when Aster's bonds would be especially vulnerable and their board especially tired. The incident in Phoenix had accelerated everything. What turns a business decision into a movement? The moment it becomes personal. Have you ever watched a company fail its customers and thought, I could do this better? Imani didn't just think it, she acted on it. This acquisition wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability, and the difference matters. But how do you transform an entire company culture? The strategy Imani used will change how you think about power. On the second day after the news broke, a letter arrived by courier. The return address was a law firm, so old its marble had veins. It accused Carver of opportunism. It accused Imani of publicity seeking. It did not accuse Aster of anything at all. At the bottom, in a signature that sloped like a ski run, was the name of the woman from 2A, Paige Whitlock, JD Senior Counsel for Aster Air. Imani laughed then, a clean, surprised sound that shook something loose inside her. She'd thought Paige was a random passenger, a person snared in the grim choreography of bias. But Paige was the choreographer. The betrayal wasn't personal, it was systemic. That made it both worse and easier to fight. Greer, are you seeing this? Imani asked when her banker picked up. The letter? Just landed on my desk too. Bold move, sending their attack dog. Not bold. Desperate, Imani replied. They know we're serious now. The press is calling it a revenge acquisition. Imani's voice hardened. Then we need to change the narrative. Call everyone in. Conference room. 2 hours. If you believe in accountability over revenge, type justice in the comments. Let me know you're still with me on this journey. Carver's office in Midtown Manhattan housed a conference room named after Bessie Coleman, the first African-American woman to earn a pilot's license. On the wall hung a black and white photo of Coleman in her leather helmet, eyes set like flint. Around the table sat Imani's team, Greer with his long fingers drum-tapping a 6/8 beat on the packet, Langston with his red pen itching, Ao from operations, Priyanka from ESG, Ortiz from labor relations, Safia dialing in from Oakland with her baby asleep on her chest. This wasn't just a team. It was a coalition, diverse in background but unified in purpose. This is the plan, Imani said, standing beneath Coleman's watchful gaze. We buy the airline to prove that safety and dignity scale. We end the jet bridge stops. We reform the complaint process so no one can invent a smell to erase a person. Her voice gained momentum as she outlined her vision. We invest in the communities adjacent to the runways we own: noise abatement, asthma clinics, job pipelines. We remove every legacy aviation lounge and plaque named for the names we've learned to ignore. She thought of Denver's airport that used to be called Stapleton, for a mayor who wore the hood. We changed the names. Greer nodded. And the unions? We listen, Imani said. We set up an employee stock program that doesn't just exist on paper. We widen the cockpit pipeline beyond the usual flight schools, beyond the usual scholarships, beyond the usual cousins. We partner with HBCUs for maintenance and engineering apprenticeships. We become the airline that can be a mirror without being a weapon. Langston, who saw risk like a radiologist sees fractures, pointed to the press clipping about the blocked BlueJet Aster merger. Regulators will watch you like a hawk. Good, Imani said. Let them watch. This wasn't just an acquisition strategy. It was a manifesto, a declaration that business could be both profitable and purposeful, that accountability and growth weren't mutually exclusive. In that moment, seated around that table beneath Bessie Coleman's gaze, they weren't just planning a corporate takeover. They were plotting a revolution in how companies respond to discrimination, not with press releases and diversity trainings, but with structural change. As the meeting concluded, Greer pulled Imani aside. The media narrative is still going to be revenge. How do we counter that? Imani considered this. We don't counter it. We transcend it. This isn't about what happened to me. It's about what happens to everyone who looks like me when they step onto a plane. She paused, then added, get me on every major network. Not to talk about the incident, to talk about the vision. And find me every black pilot, flight attendant, and ground crew member who's filed a complaint against Astor in the last 5 years. Their stories are our case. Over the next week, as Astor's stock price fluctuated with each new headline, Imani executed her media strategy with precision. She never mentioned the incident directly. She never named Paige Whitlock or Dee Birch. Instead, she spoke about patterns, about data showing black passengers made up more than half of JetBridge stops, about seizures of cash without charges, about complaint systems that privileged employee perception over passenger reality. She turned a personal humiliation into a systemic critique. She transformed a moment of powerlessness into a movement for change. And as Astor's CEO Rowan Quill went on cable to insist, with the kind of rectitude that sounded like a lie, that his airline did not discriminate, Imani was building a coalition of shareholders powerful enough to force a board vote. The countdown to transformation had begun. The vote at Astor's board was scheduled for a Wednesday, 10 days after Thanksgiving. 10 days that transformed an industry. Behind closed doors, a battle raged for the soul of Astor Air. Rowan Quill, the airline CEO, mobilized every ally, called in every favor, and deployed every argument to maintain control. This is a hostile takeover disguised as social justice, he told board members in private calls. Don't let emotion override fiduciary duty. But Imani Caldwell wasn't fighting with emotion. She was fighting with facts. Carver Ascendant's team had compiled a devastating dossier. Internal emails showing Astor executives joking about passenger complaints. Data revealing racial disparities in upgrade approvals. Testimony from former employees about unwritten policies targeting certain passengers for extra scrutiny. This wasn't just about one incident on one flight. It was about a pattern so consistent it could only be intentional, or intentionally ignored. As the vote approached, Wall Street analysts predicted failure for Carver's bid. Sentiment doesn't move markets, one prominent commentator declared. Caldwell is playing an emotional game in a mathematical arena. What they failed to understand was that Imani had mastered both games. The mathematics of debt acquisition. The emotion of a movement whose time had come. The most powerful weapon in business isn't money, it's momentum. And Imani had both. Have you ever watched someone underestimate you, only to realize too late exactly who they're dealing with? This boardroom battle wasn't just about who would control an airline. It was about who gets to define safety, dignity, and belonging in American skies. But how do you convince profit-driven shareholders to bet on values? The strategy will change how you think about power. The morning of the vote, Astor's largest institutional shareholder, NorthJet Holdings, signaled opposition to Carver's bid. The markets responded immediately. Astor's stock jumped 3 points. Financial news tickers declared, Caldwell bid likely to fail. Rowan Quill arrived at Astor's headquarters with the confident stride of a man who believed he'd already won. Paige Whitlock walked 2 steps behind him, her cinnamon bob smooth as if nothing had mussed it ever. What they didn't know was that Imani had spent the night on the phone with a coalition of smaller funds, pension boards, and one glowering union trust that controlled, collectively, enough votes to tip the balance. She hadn't appealed to their sense of justice. She'd appealed to their sense of future, showing how Astor's cultural failures were creating financial liabilities, how discrimination wasn't just wrong but expensive. The boardroom was antiseptic, the kind of beige that corporations mistake for seriousness. Rowan Quill sat at the head like a preacher who'd lost his faith but kept the robe. Paige sat 5 chairs down on the left, her expression carefully neutral. When Imani entered, the room didn't exactly fall silent. It compressed, as if the air itself recognized a force that could not be contained by conventional boundaries. The most powerful moments happen when preparation meets opportunity. Type "ready" in the comments if you've ever been underestimated, and prove them wrong. Imani presented with the quiet radiance of a storm seen from far away. She didn't mention Phoenix. She didn't have to. She talked debt ratios and fleet utilization, how Astor's growth had made it forgetful about service quality and too fond of partnership with airport police. She talked about the Big Four airlines and the way gravity worked in markets. Mass attracted mass. She spoke of a counterweight, a black-owned, broadly owned airline in a country where ownership had long been a private club. She said the words slowly because they'd never been said in that room before. We will be the ones who own the sky and we will not weaponize it. Rowan asked the questions he was supposed to ask. How would Carver handle the holiday rush? What was her plan for the pilots who'd threatened to strike? Imani answered with charts and then with stories. About a black mother escorted off a plane for looking a white attendant in the eye. About a comedian held on a jet bridge and asked if he was carrying drugs. About a grandfather in Denver who worked the ramp for 20 years and died from lungs the color of smoke. The story, it turned out, was the plan. During a break, Paige approached Imani, a glass of water trembling slightly in her hand. "You have to know," she said, "this wasn't about you personally." Imani felt a patience she had not ordered rise up in her. "That's the problem," she said. "It never is." That exchange, brief, loaded with unspoken history, captured the essence of the battle. Not personal versus professional, but systemic versus individual. Not revenge versus business, but accountability versus evasion. When the board reconvened, the tension was palpable. The vote looked close until it didn't. Northjet Holdings had signaled opposition, but Greer had been smart, and Imani had been relentless, and a coalition of smaller funds, pension boards, and one glowering union trust had turned. The tally slid across the table like a slow wave, then broke. Carver Ascendant Partners had won. The moment the final vote was counted, something shifted in the room, not just the balance of power but the understanding of what power could do. Rowan Quill's face drained of color. Paige Whitlock's perfect composure cracked, just slightly at the edges. But it was the reaction of the board's only black member, a man who had spent years being the lone voice of caution, the designated diversity hire, that told the real story. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply exhaled as if he'd been holding his breath for decades. As Imani gathered her materials to leave, that board member approached her. "This isn't just about an airline," he said quietly. "This is about proving what's possible." Imani nodded. Possibility is the only thing worth buying. Outside the boardroom, reporters had gathered like storm clouds. "Is this revenge?" they shouted as Imani emerged. "Is this personal?" She paused, considering the question that reduced a systemic revolution to an individual grudge. "This is accountability," she said simply. "And accountability is always personal, for someone." The headlines the next morning told different versions of the same historic fact. Black-owned firm acquires major airline in unprecedented deal. Financial analysts scrambled to explain how they'd missed the signals. Industry experts debated whether Carver could actually transform Astor's culture. Social media exploded with stories from black travelers sharing their own receipts, their own moments of humiliation in airports and on planes. What had begun as one woman's stand for dignity had become a movement for accountability across an entire industry. That evening, as Imani sat in her mother's apartment planning the press conference that would announce the new vision for the airline, her phone rang. It was Greer. "The pilots' union wants to meet," he said. "The flight attendants too. They're nervous." "Good," Imani replied. "They should be. Not about their jobs, about their responsibility. Schedule the meetings. First thing tomorrow." She hung up and turned to her mother, who was watching the news coverage with quiet pride. "They think this is the end of the story," her mother said, gesturing to the television. "They don't understand it's just the beginning." Imani smiled. "The beginning is the only part that matters. Everything else is just following through." And follow through she would, transforming not just an airline, but an industry's understanding of what safety and dignity really meant. The real work was about to begin. The press conference was set for the following morning at JFK, Terminal 5, under the great curve of glass that made even winter light look generous. This wasn't just a corporate announcement. It was a declaration of principles. Imani wore a navy suit so dark it drank the cameras. Behind her stood the new board, brown, black, white, a spectrum of possibility in sensible shoes. Ahead of her stood a forest of microphones, hungry for a story simple enough to trend. "This is not a revenge story," she began, and then paused as a ripple of laughter moved through the gaggle, a sound like plastic rustling. "But it is a story with consequences." What followed wasn't just a speech. It was a blueprint for transformation, specific, measurable, and revolutionary in its simplicity. A permanent end to jet bridge consensual encounters, in partnership with airport authorities. A restructure of the complaint system so that all crew claims required corroboration beyond a single biased perception. Body scanners calibrated with the hair and bodies that exist in the world, not just those that fit a narrow definition of standard. A community flight fund to invest 1% of profits in neighborhoods under the glide paths, air filters for schools, scholarships for aviation tech apprenticeships. A research grant with a university public health department to track asthma rates and intervene. A reinstated and empowered advisory council of black travelers and workers who could pull a red brake on policy when harm rose like heat. A new naming policy. Terminals and lounges to bear the names of aviators like Bessie Coleman and Eugene Bullard, not men in white hoods. Music shifts to something more determined. This wasn't corporate social responsibility as performance. This was structural change, the kind that rewrites not just policies but possibilities. True power isn't just changing who sits in the decision-making seat. It's changing how decisions get made. Have you ever wondered what would happen if the people most affected by a system's failures were the ones who got to redesign it? This transformation wasn't just about making an airline less racist. It was about building a model where dignity isn't a luxury upgrade. But can a corporate structure really deliver justice? The implementation reveals something profound about power. A reporter asked if she'd spoken to the crew involved in Phoenix. "Not yet," she said, "and I don't intend to punish scapegoats for a system that taught them to fear. We will hold people accountable for choices, and we will repair the system that made those choices plausible." Another asked if she planned to keep the Astor name. Imani smiled. "Names matter," she said. "So do second chances." She announced the new name, Ascendant Air. The logo would be a stylized ladder with wings. The tagline, "Everyone rises." The symbolism wasn't subtle, but it was powerful. An airline named after the investment firm that acquired it. A firm named after a black innovator who transformed what was possible through ingenuity and determination. A ladder, the universal symbol of upward mobility, of climbing beyond limitations. Wings, the promise of flight, of freedom, of perspective. Everyone rises, not just passengers, not just profits, but people. Communities. Possibilities. Transformation isn't just about changing what exists. It's about imagining what could be. Type "RISE" in the comments if you believe in the power of reimagining broken systems. Spending Christmas week in a tangle of union negotiations and regulatory filings wasn't romantic, but it was honest. The pilots wanted guarantees. The flight attendants wanted hazard pay and a say. The TSA wanted meetings to soothe over the end of jet bridge participation. Imani gave them calendars packed with tough conversations and engineers who could turn promises into policy. She gave them open books and time clocks that paid for actual time. She gave them a horizon line. In a conference room at LaGuardia, the head of the flight attendants union, a woman who'd spent 20 years in the air and had the spine to prove it, leaned forward. "You're promising a lot," she said. "How do we know this isn't just talk?" Imani slid a document across the table. It was the new complaint policy, requiring multiple witnesses, video evidence where available, and a review by a diverse panel before any passenger could be removed. "Because I've been that passenger," Imani said. "And I'm never going to let it happen to anyone else if I can help it." The union head read the policy, nodding slowly. "This is a start," she said. "But we need more." "Tell me," Imani replied. And then she did something CEOs rarely do. She listened. For 4 hours, flight attendants shared stories of impossible situations, of being caught between passenger safety and corporate policies that prioritized on-time departures, of reporting harassment only to be told they were too sensitive, of watching black colleagues passed over for international routes. Imani didn't defend. She didn't explain. She took notes. And then she revised the policy, right there, in real time, with the people who would have to implement it. This wasn't just a new management style. It was a new understanding of where expertise lives, not just in corner offices, but in the lived experience of those who navigate broken systems every day. The pilots came next, skeptical, professional, predominantly white and male. They brought concerns about safety protocols, about training standards, about the integration of new routes. But they also brought questions about the Community Flight Fund, about how investing in neighborhoods under flight paths might affect their own communities, their own children's schools. "This isn't charity," Imani explained. "It's justice. The communities that bear the burden of aviation noise and pollution deserve to share in aviation's benefits." She showed them the data: higher asthma rates in neighborhoods adjacent to runways, lower property values, fewer educational opportunities. And then she showed them the plan: air quality monitoring stations, filtration systems for schools, scholarships for local students interested in aviation careers. "We're not just an airline," she said. "We're neighbors. And good neighbors don't poison each other's air and then fly away." By the end of the meeting, the pilots' representatives weren't just on board. They were offering ideas. One suggested a mentorship program connecting pilots with high school students in affected neighborhoods. Another proposed voluntary carbon offset contributions from crew members, matched by the company. This wasn't compliance. It wasn't even buy-in. It was co-creation, the kind that transforms not just policies but people. The TSA meetings were harder. Federal agencies moved slowly, and partnerships with airport police for jet bridge stops had become entrenched. But Imani came with data, showing how these stops disproportionately targeted black passengers, how they rarely resulted in actual security threats, how they created liability and eroded trust. "We're withdrawing consent," she said simply. "Ascendant Air will not participate in discriminatory practices disguised as security measures." When the TSA representatives pushed back, citing protocols and procedures, Imani didn't argue. She invited them to the inaugural flight, to see firsthand how dignity and security could coexist. Throughout these negotiations, one figure remained conspicuously absent. Paige Whitlock, the woman from Seat 2A, Astor's senior counsel who had become the face of the resistance to Carver's acquisition. Rumors circulated that she had resigned. Others said she had been fired. The truth was more complicated, and more revealing of Imani's vision. Paige had been reassigned. Not demoted, not punished, but given a new role, heading the committee responsible for implementing the new complaint policy. The person who had benefited from a bias system was now tasked with dismantling it. When questioned about this decision, Imani was direct. Transformation isn't about removing people. It's about repositioning them, giving them the opportunity to be part of the solution rather than perpetuating the problem. A week after the acquisition, Paige requested a meeting. She arrived at Imani's temporary office at JFK, now housed in what had been the Founders Lounge, but was being renamed the Coleman Conference Center, with none of the confidence she had displayed in Seat 2A. "I wanted to say," Paige began, reaching for words that wouldn't stay, "I don't need your apology," Imani said gently, and meant it. "I need your signature." Paige blinked, taken aback. Imani held out a stack, a document dissolving Astor's partnership with airport police for jet bridge stops, a policy mandating corroboration for passenger removals, a schedule for anti-bias training designed by people who understood both flight operations and harm. "You know the systems," Imani added. "Help build better ones." Paige swallowed. Her hand shook slightly as she signed. "I can do that." "Good," Imani said. "Then do it." This moment, this quiet exchange between two women who had begun as adversaries, captured the essence of Imani's vision for transformation. Not punishment but purpose. Not revenge but reconstruction. The true measure of power isn't the ability to destroy what doesn't work. It's the ability to build something better in its place. And as Christmas gave way to New Year's, as winter settled over the eastern seaboard, as Ascendant Air prepared for its inaugural flight, that's exactly what Imani Caldwell was doing, building something that had never existed before. An airline where dignity wasn't just promised but structurally guaranteed. The transformation wasn't just corporate. It was cultural. And it was just beginning. On New Year's Day, Imani flew the inaugural Ascendant Air flight from Hartsfield-Jackson to LaGuardia with her mother by her side. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone, beginning this new chapter in Atlanta, the airport where she'd been stopped on a jet bridge a year earlier, where black passengers had been disproportionately targeted for consensual encounters. The cabin smelled like orange oil and new possibilities. Flight attendants wore uniforms designed by a black fashion student from Spelman College. Practical, elegant, and cut to fit diverse body types. The safety cards featured illustrations of passengers with different hairstyles, body shapes, and mobility devices. These weren't cosmetic changes. They were declarations: everyone belongs here. A little girl in row 12 wore a sparkly headband and slept with her mouth open, the way children do when they are safe. Imani ran a finger over the safety card as if it were Braille. She thought of the men who had told her the sky wasn't for her except as a passenger, of the approvals that had stacked like stones against her head, and still she rose. At cruising altitude, the captain's voice, Ao, who had flown military transport and crop dusters and anything with a wing, came over the speakers. "Welcome aboard, folks. We're proud to begin a new year, a new airline, and a new way of doing this together. Together." The word tasted like something that could last. True victory isn't just changing who sits in Seat 2A. It's changing what that seat represents. Have you ever witnessed a moment where justice wasn't just talked about, but actually implemented? Where words became actions? This story isn't just about one airline or one incident. It's about what becomes possible when accountability meets opportunity. What systems around you need this kind of transformation? And what's stopping you from being the one to start it? News crews followed them into the terminal, but Imani peeled away. She found a window that looked out over the field, the runway scribed like veins. Beyond it, Queens, the cranes at the Navy Yard, the winter bare trees like pencil sketches. Her mother leaned against her shoulder. "You did it, baby," she said. Imani thought about all the things that had taught her she could not, and then about the thing that had said she must. The seat taken. The bridge stops. The laughs muted. The accusations of smell where dignity should have been. She watched a plane lift into the January light, a clean line rising. For the first time in a long time she felt something simpler than victory. She felt rightness. The kind that isn't an omen. The kind you make and then you make again. This journey from humiliation to transformation shows what's possible when we refuse to accept injustice. If this story moved you, hit subscribe now. Join our community of people who believe in accountability and change. The impact of Ascendant Air extended far beyond one company or one industry. It became a case study in business schools, a reference point in diversity discussions, a model for how accountability could drive innovation rather than hinder it. Within 6 months, passenger complaints across Ascendant's routes dropped by 40%. Employee retention improved. On-time performance, that holy grail of airline metrics, actually increased, not because of punitive policies, but because staff felt invested in the airline's success. The Community Flight Fund began distributing its first grants: air filtration systems for schools in Queens, noise-canceling windows for homes near O'Hare, scholarships for maintenance technician programs targeting students from neighborhoods adjacent to Atlanta's runways. These weren't charitable donations. They were investments in justice, in the radical idea that those who bear the burdens of an industry should share in its benefits. Other airlines watched, then reacted. Some dismissed Ascendant's approach as social engineering. Others quietly began reviewing their own complaint procedures, their own partnerships with airport police, their own calibration of security equipment. The Big Four, those industry giants who had long set the standards for American aviation, found themselves facing questions they'd previously avoided. Why were their flight crews so homogeneous? Why did their complaint data show racial disparities? Why were their community investments so disconnected from the neighborhoods their operations affected? Change rippled outward, not because Ascendant had demanded it, but because they had demonstrated a better way was possible, and profitable. A week later, on a gray Tuesday in Boston, Imani walked through Logan's Terminal B past a TSA installation redesigned with the help of Ascendant's data scientists. Discrete signs explained the new protocol in plain English and Spanish. The scanners had been recalibrated. A stylist from Roxbury had consulted on guidelines for black women's hair so that a twist-out would not be treated like contraband. A little boy watched a jet push back and told his dad he wanted to be a pilot. The dad didn't laugh. On the jet bridge, a phrase that would never feel entirely benign, Imani paused, feeling the air hum with old memories. A uniformed officer looked up, recognized her, and nodded. "Miss Caldwell," he said. "We're trying to do it better." "I know," she replied. "We are too." The plane door opened with a sound like acceptance. Inside, 2A waited, hers by right of boarding pass and something more durable. She placed her bag overhead and sat down. The cabin crew bustled. A woman across the aisle adjusted her scarf. A man in 2D read an article about Ascendant's Community Flight Fund on his phone and smiled like he'd found money in an old coat. Outside, snow began to fall over the Atlantic, determined and soft. Inside, Imani exhaled. The seat fit. The sky opened. This is where most stories would end, with the triumph complete, the transformation accomplished, the hero seated comfortably in the place that was always rightfully hers. But Imani Caldwell's story, and Ascendant Air's, was just beginning. Because true transformation isn't an event. It's a process. It's a commitment renewed daily, a vision implemented hourly, a promise kept in every interaction. Somewhere, at another gate in another city, a kid with a head full of questions watched a plane lift and learned a new one that would carry him further than any airframe ever built. Why not me? And somewhere, in airports across America, black travelers moved through terminals and boarded planes without the weight of anticipating humiliation. They carried bags, not burdens. They occupied seats without having to justify their presence. This wasn't just about one woman buying an airline after being removed from a first-class seat. It was about what becomes possible when accountability meets opportunity. When dignity becomes not just a value to aspire to, but a standard to maintain. If this story resonated with you, don't just like and subscribe, though please do that too. Ask yourself, what system around you needs transformation? What seat are you meant to occupy? What change are you positioned to create? Because the most powerful lesson from Imani Caldwell's journey isn't that she bought an airline. It's that she recognized her power to transform it, and then did exactly that. Like, comment, and subscribe to join our community of storytellers and change makers. And remember, everyone rises.